From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana. It was the court case that gripped the French political world. Earlier this week, it finally concluded.
We're in a courtroom near the Place de Clichy on the outskirts of Paris, a fairly bland, nondescript, modern kind of building. Marine Le Pen has been sitting in the front row to hear the verdict that is going to be pronounced. But when she hears the word guilty, she essentially stands up and storms out of the courtroom, pursued by a number of French journalists.
The judge hadn't yet finished delivering his sentence when Marine Le Pen was already out of the courtroom doors. Banned from running for public office with immediate effect, she'd seemingly heard enough. A 5-year ban, a $100,000 fine and a 4-year prison sentence, 2 of which will be suspended, the other 2 spent with an electronic tag.
Having stormed out of court, Marine Le Pen wasted no time in marching into the TV studios to decry the decision of the judge.
I think the judges got it wrong. I think they chose to ignore all of the explanations that were given, because in the very first hours of this trial, I had understood that the court was biased against us. I did not think that the magistrates would go this far against our democratic process.
Was this a dark day for French democracy, or a demonstration of how the French judicial system holds people to account, regardless of their political heft and influence? And how much will this impact the results of the next presidential elections? The story today: how Le Pen's conviction could strengthen the hard right.
My name's Peter Conradi. I'm the Europe editor of the Sunday Times.
How did you react when you heard the news that Marine Le Pen had been found guilty? And just give us a sense of the reaction across Paris.
There's something curious with French legal cases, that there is a very, very long period between the time when the case ends and when the verdict is pronounced. French courts typically don't have juries. The decision is taken normally by 3 judges, and they need time to deliberate. So everybody knew that the verdict was coming, that it was scheduled on March the 31st. And it was also very, very widely expected that Marine Le Pen was going to be convicted, because it seemed to be a very straightforward case against her and against her fellow members of the party. The one thing that wasn't clear, though, was whether she would also, as well as being punished for the crime, whether she would also be barred from standing for political office, or rather whether that bar would come in immediately or only in at some later stage after she'd gone through the very, very long appeals process. So the surprising thing was that the judges decided that she should indeed be barred from standing for any political office with immediate effect. And that was really the bombshell. This was what she, Marine Le Pen, later described as having been a nuclear bomb that was detonated by the court.
The system has taken out its nuclear bomb. And if it's using such a powerful weapon against us, it's of course because we're about to win the election.
And just describe the reaction across Paris to that news.
Well, let's say the reaction of ordinary French people, I think, is difficult to gauge. I mean, certainly the reaction among the political classes was considerable, because this was just not expected. It was obviously a possibility, but there was always the expectation that it would be a step too far by the judge to ban her immediately. So when this did come, and it's been dominating the evening news here, it's been dominating the papers, there's been this gradual realization that France is heading towards potentially another political crisis.
And Peter, we've talked about Marine Le Pen on the podcast before, and we'll put a few links in the description of this episode if people want some background on her political career. But just remind us of how key a figure she is on the French political scene right now, why this was such an earthquake, why it was, as she said, the detonation of a nuclear bomb on the French political landscape.
Well, she is an enormously important political figure because, she's been around for a long time. She's led what is now called the National Rally Party, which used to be called the National Front Party. She's led that since 2011. She stood 3 times for the presidency. The first time she didn't do terribly well. The second time, in 2017, she made it into the second round runoff against Macron and lost something like 34 to 66% to him. But then in 2022, she further improved her score to like 41 to 59. And there's the expectation that come the election, the next presidential election in 2027, she does stand, or would have stood, a very, very good chance of becoming France's next president.
And she's from the hard right in France. She's part of a political dynasty. I know you interviewed her father once. Just give us a quick pen portrait of the man. What was he like?
He was an extraordinary character. It's certainly a product of another age. He'd been in French politics since the 1950s. He set up what was then the National Front something like 40 years or so ago, longer than that actually, and gradually brought it into the political mainstream. His great achievement was in 2002, he made it into the second round of the presidential election, even though he then got completely trounced. Now, he was very much a figure on the far right fringes of French politics. He was notorious for having dismissed the Holocaust as being a kind of a detail of history.
I'm not saying that gas chambers have not existed, but I think that it's a detail of World War II's history.
Wow.
And for that, after Marine Le Pen took over the party, she basically expelled him. And he kind of remained there until his death in January this year as a sort of a figure lurking there on the edges of French politics. As you said, I met him in 2022. And he was completely unrepentant. He was still very, very far right. He was still sticking very much to his views. And when I challenged him over his Holocaust denial, he said, he just repeated it and said, what was it if it wasn't just a detail of history?
Oh, wow. And he's the awkward guest at dinner, I suppose, for the party. She has managed to make it much more mainstream. She's led the party since 2011. As you say, she stood for president 3 times. More recently, the party has been in the ascendancy until this court case. Just remind us what the charges were against her and the party and how this court case came about.
Yeah, the charges are relatively complicated, but essentially it started with the European Parliament. And that's where all the problems began, the legal problems began for her. So basically, within the European Parliament, political parties receive a large amount of money, and obviously not just the salaries for MEPs, but also money to pay for assistants. But there are strict rules about how this money should be used, and i.e. should be spent only on the assistance of the MEPs. It can't be spent more broadly on the political activities of the party. And basically, the accusation against the National Rally, or the National Front as it was then, is that between 2004 and 2016, i.e. a very, very long period of time, they were using money that should have been used purely for parliamentary activities. And that money was just going into the party's coffers, and it was being used for all sorts of things that had absolutely nothing to do with the Parliament in Strasbourg. And as far as the EU Parliament was concerned, this was sort of a misappropriation of funds, and a legal case was then started against the party, which has been dragging on for years and years and years, of which we then finally got the guilty verdict this week.
So this is EU money for the smooth running of business in the EU Parliament, money that has come from across Europe being siphoned off to pay for political activities in France to support Marine Le Pen's party. Just give us a sense of how much money we're talking about.
During the course of the case, there was accusations of different amounts of money having been misappropriated, but in the end, the conviction was for 2.9 million euros of money, which it was demonstrated had been misappropriated during this period. I mean, the party tried to argue that there is a considerable grey area. I mean, this problem is not unique to the National Rally Party. A number of other political parties have fallen into this same trap of kind of mixing the two items of expenditure together. And I mean, I think, there are certainly probably grey areas where you could say, is someone actually doing the job directly for an MEP? Or, are they actually working for the broader party? But I think it's very clear that Marine Le Pen and those around her knew what was going on, because as part of the case, some interesting evidence was presented with sort of MEPs who arrived in Parliament who were ordered to spend their money in a certain way by the party. And some of them expressed misgivings and said, are you sure we should be doing this? Does Marine know about this? And they were all assured, it's absolutely fine. This is the way the party works. This is the way we do things. Marine is aware of this. Just do it. I mean, ironically, among those who have been accused of a similar crime is François Bayrou, the French Prime Minister. He used to be an MEP. He was accused, along with several of his party colleagues, of misappropriating funds. Because of that, he was forced to resign as Justice Minister back in 2017. It took 7 years before his case came to court, which just shows how slowly the French legal system works. In the end, he was acquitted in February last year, but 8 others in his party were convicted and they were fined. So there is a lot of this about. And I think what should be clear is that this wasn't money that was kind of going into Marine Le Pen's pocket. There were no luxury cruises being bought or villas or holidays of any sort or whatever. This was essentially a political party which was struggling to raise money through conventional means, which at one stage very controversially took out a loan from a Russian bank because it was so short of cash and no one in the sort of the French financial system would lend to it, that was looking around for innovative ways of financing itself and thought, we're getting all this money from the European Parliament. Does it really matter if we spend it in a slightly different way from the way that it's meant to be spent?
And just explain, so Marine Le Pen, as you described, stormed off as the verdict came in and she realised she'd been found guilty. How did that translate into a ban on standing in elections? Is that a natural course of action? How does that come about?
Well, no, it's not. And that's the controversial thing about this judgment, because I think there was a wide expectation that she would be found guilty. But the question was, would she also be banned from political office or not? And that was entirely within the discretion of the judge. Because in the French legal system, particularly with cases like this, a first conviction is not really considered to be definitive because everybody always appeals against them. And the whole process then starts again. And there is always this sense that no one has been properly convicted until they've gone to appeal and until they've actually lost that appeal, or, they may win the appeal. The expectation from the Le Pen camp was, I think, very clearly that she would be convicted, that they would then appeal it, that the process would drag on for a long time, most probably until after the presidential election in 2027, but that in the meantime, she would be free to continue her political activities and she would be free to stand for election. What the judge did, which has caused such consternation, is that she said, no, I'm going to impose a 5-year ban on political activity from now. So this surprised people because she didn't have to do that. And, it surprised also, legal experts, not just supporters of Le Pen, because one of the grounds that she gave for insisting on this immediate ban was that there was a danger that Le Pen could do the same again, to which critics replied, well, no, she can't do the same again because she's not a member of the European Parliament. So this is essentially nonsense. There was also the other complaint that the judge said that another reason why she decided to impose this immediate ban was because of the way that Le Pen refused to accept that she was guilty, to which, again, defenders of Le Pen and also some other legal scholars have said, well, of course, that's what defending yourself is all about. That's what pleading not guilty is all about. So for that reason, it has become very, very controversial. And it's quite interesting if you look at the response from politicians. It's not just been a sort of a simple Le Pen supporters say this is bad, everyone else says this is great, justice has been done. She's had some quite unlikely supporters. For example, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who is the kind of the French Jeremy Corbyn, we can call him, on the far left, who has said that it was wrong for this ban to be imposed immediately. You had also François Bayrou, the French Prime Minister, who during parliamentary question time, or the French equivalent of it, this week, came quite close to expressing his misgivings. And Emmanuel Macron, the president, has kept well out of this because he doesn't want to be seen to be interfering in the judicial process. But there is said to be sort of some disquiet also among the presidential camp about the consequences of this, because it looks very much like judicial interference in the political process. It looks very much as if she is somehow being prevented by the judges from standing. And that's, that is dangerous in a democracy, I think.
So, Peter, she said she would appeal this decision. She would appeal the verdict immediately. How does that appeal process play out? Is there a chance that she will still be allowed to run for president?
Yes, there is. How good that chance is not clear, because essentially what has happened is, normally speaking, French justice works very, very slowly. This time, I think there's been a realization of the seriousness of the situation. And it was announced very quickly that her appeal will be held next year and that there will be a verdict as soon as the summer of next year. And that given the elections are not until 2027, that would then give a good 9 months for her to stand, for her to run a campaign and so on. I mean, that's, of course, presuming that she actually wins the appeal. It's a fairly clear-cut case against her. So there is obviously then, for her and for her party, the danger that she'll simply lose and that ban will remain in force. I mean, in the meantime, there are other maneuverings going on. There is a suggestion that one of her allies, a guy called Eric Ciotti, who is from the Républicain party, a sort of breakaway part of the Républicains that have gone over to her side, he's putting forward a private member's question, or the French equivalent of one, in June, which would somehow allow Parliament effectively to vote against this ban on political activity. So she has chances of somehow finding her way through this and still standing. But, whether that will actually happen is not clear.
So, Peter, while the wheels of justice turn slowly, we expect an appeal decision sometime next summer. What will her party be making of all of this? I mean, she leaves a huge hole at the top of the National Rally. Who might fill it?
Yeah, well, you see, yes and no in terms of the huge hole at the top, because Marine Le Pen very, very carefully has been grooming a man called Jourdain Bardella. He's only 29 now. He is, formally speaking, the president of the party. He's been the president of the party since 2022. He's, an extraordinarily kind of precocious political talent. He got involved in politics, I think, at the age of 15 or so. At the age of 23, he actually led the National Rally's campaign for the European Parliament. And he has been there groomed as her eventual successor. And a lot of people were suggesting to me last year that, in fact, they could see potentially that this verdict was coming, and that therefore he's always been there. They've been preparing him as being the fallback position should something like this happen to Le Pen. And if Marine Le Pen runs, or is still able to run in 2027, she will run as a presidential candidate, but she will run on a sort of a double ticket with him, because she's always said, if I become president, I will appoint Jordan Bardella as my prime minister. So we have a situation where, in a sense, they're not as badly hit as they might be if she is forced to withdraw, because there is Jordan Bardella. He would then become the presidential candidate. And I mean, some people have then suggested, well, Marine Le Pen could become the prime ministerial candidate. And they could just sort of flip.
So still be a double ticket.
Exactly. And that bizarrely, she wouldn't be prevented from standing for prime minister, because in order to be prime minister in France, you don't need to sit in parliament, you don't need to be elected, you can merely be appointed by the president. So, that is a very obvious way out for the party. The problem that they face in the short term is, can they keep up this double act? No one in the party wants to admit that Le Pen will not be able to stand. So they're continuing to insist that she will be their candidate and that Bardella will be her number two. They just have to keep that going.
Peter, I can hear the bells of Paris behind you, and it's rather joyful. I can understand that the party has an automatic candidate to step into Marine Le Pen's shoes, but would he be as popular? I mean, he will be in his early 30s come the next election. Is he seen as electable when it comes to the presidency as she would be?
Bardella is actually extremely popular. There have been a number of opinion polls done in the past few days who show that in the first round of a presidential election, he would probably do just as well as she would do. He will probably get about 36% of the vote. The question, though, is when you get to the decisive second round, which will become a runoff between Bardella and probably a centrist candidate. It won't be Emmanuel Macron because he can't stand for a third time. So when it comes to that runoff, would people be as likely to go for Bardella as they would be for Le Pen? The polls suggest that maybe 2 percentage point or so fewer people would go for him. And that could be crucial, and that could in fact be the difference between victory and losing.
But the National Rally is very, very much still in the game with Bardella at the top. How has he been responding to the verdict on Marine Le Pen?
They have both been singing very much from the same hymn sheet. I mean, it's a very, impressive, coordinated response from both of them. They had a long crisis meeting on Monday afternoon, which went on for several hours, involving them and various other people from the party, and they've clearly adopted this strategy. I mean, it's crucial for them that they should be seen to form a united front, and that he shouldn't be seen to be undermining her, because that's key to electoral success. And so far, he's been doing a very good job of it. He's been expressing the same outrage as her. He's been criticizing the whole process in the same way that she has. He will be playing a big role alongside her in a rally which they are organizing in central Paris near the Parliament building on Sunday, which is expected to get a lot of people coming along. So, it's the whole idea is a united front behind Marine Le Pen.
Peter, Marine Le Pen has described this case as a political witch hunt. It's often said that Trump's convictions and all the court cases against him helped him get elected in a way because they created real cause for his supporters. Do you think this might have a similar effect on the National Rally, whether it's Le Pen or Bardella leading them come the next election?
I think there are big differences between France and America. It's quite interesting here. There's been a lot of discussion of, whether there is going to be a Trumpization or Trumpisation of French politics. And I think everyone, even particularly the National Rally themselves, are quite reluctant to go down that route because they know that actually, that might energize some of their own supporters, but it puts off the mainstream voters whom they really need to win a second runoff term in the presidential election. So they have to be quite careful about how they respond to this. And also you've got to bear in mind that the National Rally, also pose as being the party of law and order, of respect for the law. And so again, they're in a slightly awkward position here because they have been convicted of breaking the law. So it's all a bit of a sort of a balancing act for them. So they have to, on the one hand, they criticize the decision of the individual judge, but they have to be careful not to be seen to be leading some broader charge against the legal system.
And Peter, there's been a huge reaction around the world. Just give us a sense of that, because while the National Rally may want to try and differentiate themselves from America, for example, for politicians of the far right and the right across the world, this is sort of becoming a cause.
I mean, there has indeed. I think there has been a mixture of amusement and concern here that the first political leader to comment on this was Vladimir Putin, or rather his spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, who within minutes of this verdict started to criticize what was going on in France, which is to talk about pots and kettles and whatever. And then very, very quickly, all the usual suspects, as one might say, on the nationalist far right piled in. We had Viktor Orban, the illiberal Hungarian leader. We had Matteo Salvini, head of the right-wing League in Italy, who's also the deputy prime minister. We had a variety of other people on the European right, Geert Wilders, the Dutch nationalist leader. And then, of course, we had Elon Musk, never one to miss out on something like this, and Donald Trump himself.
That's a very big deal. I know all about it, and a lot of people thought she wasn't going to be convicted of anything, and I don't know if it means conviction, but she was banned for running for 5 years, and she's the leading candidate. That sounds like this country. That sounds very much like this country.
This is very easy kind of win for other people who sort of political allies of Marine Le Pen in other countries, who can say this is part of a broader conspiracy against us and our parties. And this conspiracy consists partly in the fact that the other parties do everything they can to keep us out of coalitions, or to not work with us, or to put up firewalls against us, or whatever the particular term is. And also to say the legal system is kind of part of this conspiracy, and in France, the legal system is being used to keep her out of the presidency. It's simplistic, it's not necessarily true, but it's very, very useful, and it fits the broader narrative.
That was Peter Conradi, Sunday Times Europe editor. And you can read all the latest on the Le Pen case at thetimes.com with a subscription. The producer today was Edith Rousselot. The executive producer was Kate Ford. Sound design and theme composition were by Mal Lassetto. If you can, do leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. Have a lovely weekend.